starting off with a question. I wish I had that little thing that captures what people are voting on, but kind of.
We've got arms.
You got arms, great. So which statement is correct? SEO belongs in the marketing department of an organization, or SEO belongs in the technical department? Kind of, okay. Both are, but if you have to definitively say this is where it goes, what I'll say is that I think I see almost universal agreement at this point in time that it's a marketing exercise. In the early 2000s, I would say that this was heavily debated, and I felt like more often than not, people were trying to convince me that it was really more of a technical exercise than a marketing exercise. Does anyone remember actually having that debate ever back, if they kind of were working back then, 2003, 2004? It's still somewhat debated. So I think it's, from all my conversations, I rarely get asked that anymore. I think universally people feel comfortable knowing that this is absolutely a marketing exercise that has some technical components to it. And yes, maybe it should reside in both. It requires both, but I always try to really help people understand that this is absolutely all about marketing. So really what I want to do first is just try and demystify and give people a very easy framework to think about how SEO works. It starts with the audience and understanding how people who are relevant to your products and services are looking for information, okay? And for SEOs, we think about this in how and what are people searching and how often. And once you have your audience strategy, which ties into all the discussions we have today about content, it's really then three pieces that you have to conquer, okay? There's the technical aspects of SEO. So how is your site structured? How is the content on your site rendering? Is it effective and efficient for the bots? How are the bots coming in and consuming that content and that code? There's nothing really that difficult, any one thing that is that difficult in technical SEO. The thing that's difficult is that there's kind of 100 things that you have to do right, and there can be that one landmine that can sabotage every other effort. Content is really about, once your site is technically rendering and the bots are finding, not just rendering the page, but finding the next page most effectively, it's content. Do I have content that is supporting the keyword strategy, the audience strategy that we've defined? And content really from an SEO perspective is both the writing and whatnot that is including support for the keywords you've identified, but it's also some technical aspects of how do I render and mark up the content, so I'm giving indication about what is the important content for the search engines. And then the last piece of the three pillars is just links and off-page signals. So it's things that Google's, and I say Google is shorthand for any search engine, things that help the search engines determine which pages and which sites are more trustworthy and authoritative. And that's really fundamentally the ranking criteria that Google's was founded on, was figuring out an invention of a backlink analysis and counter so that they could then determine which sites might be more trustworthy than others. So SEO does seem to be, I feel like it's a straightforward thing, but its execution is very difficult, especially for larger organizations. And the reason for that is you have to really think about the outcome and the success of this relies on people from a lot of different divisions and groups from an organization. I think a lot more so than most marketing exercises. And often things like you've got to certainly unite the technical team along with the content. The way sometimes product decisions, UI and UX decisions can start to have SEO consequences that people in those departments may not really understand. PR, MuraCon, all those pieces really need to be talking to each other and understand sometimes decisions they're making. They don't understand maybe the SEO ramifications of those. Now, getting that type of coordination and insight is often the challenge, especially in bigger companies. And so I have the picture of Steve Jobs up there to kind of say, what I've seen in these larger organization situations is you actually do best when you have a very strong top-down leadership or mandate to make sure that everyone appreciates the importance of doing these things. And when there isn't that top-down kind of buy-in and support and mandate, that's where I see, especially medium to large organizations, really start to have some troubles. Okay. So you get into an SEO program, whether you're bringing in an outside consultant, an agency, or you're building an in-house team to do this. One of the things I really like to have people understand is people who are SEO practitioners tend to, if I make a blanket statement, come into this from one of two angles. They're either technical SEOs that came from a technical programming background and then got into this type of marketing, or they're marketing SEOs. They're people that are usually more kind of coming in from a marketing background and thinking about keywords and content and those kind of things, and digital PR, which ties into link building, which is a big piece of SEO. So what you usually see is that very few people, I kind of put the unicorn up there, very few people really can cover the full spectrum of understanding all the technical and then getting all the way over to being truly experts in the marketing and content side of things. And very few kind of marketing people can sometimes have a really strong grasp of all the things that are technical. And so what you want to think about is, in an ideal situation, you want to make sure that you've got both sides of those coming in and helping in your SEO programs. Again, whether it's an agency, individual consultants, or an internal team that you're developing. So hopefully this is going to, there we go. I like to think about the kind of John Lennon, Paul McCartney combination. A lot of people think about that. So it's two people that really had shared passions and talent and enthusiasm, but actually approached things in very different ways. And I think a lot of people have that consensus view that they made each other a lot better. In the Beatles' music, John wasn't great without Paul, and Paul wasn't great without John. Now, we can debate that, but but I think people get the idea. And I kind of always think about that when I'm looking at like the teams that we're building. Do we have that kind of John and Paul balance coming in for our clients? Okay, so let's talk about the when. The when is the right time to bring in SEO consultation, right? And this is one of the things that, probably because I live and breathe this, it mystifies me how often this happens, that we get brought in at a very late date. So you're developing a domain, or you're redeveloping a website, and this is the please avoid doing this. Let's choose our domain, let's determine our content management system, let's define our architecture, let's build the website, let's develop the content, let's launch the site, and then let's do SEO, right? And it's like everyone kind of gets that, but it's amazing because we get phone calls like this every month. Oh, now that we've built this, can you do this for us, right? And it's kind of like the metaphor for this, I think, is if you're going to build a building, don't call the structural engineer after you've built it, right? That's the time. So you want to bring SEO determinations into all those things and a whole bunch of other things that I just kind of talked about. There's an SEO lens that you want to have inside your organization, helping to understand the perspective of that in those decisions and determinations. So key concept here is you don't SEO your website, you SEO your business, and you SEO your business practices. Seems like there's been a lot of discussion around content and audience and tying it to personas and consumer purchase cycles. So I'll take Linda's lead and say we don't need to talk tons about that. But coming back to those 3 pillars of technical, content, and links, those things are really only done once you truly understand your keyword and your audience strategy. It's only then that you can make those decisions of what is my content going to be to support that keyword strategy of how people search. And once you've determined that, you can start making better decisions about how your taxonomy, how you organize the site, your CMS, all kinds of things. So the next piece of that is building your list of keywords and understanding kind of probably one of the most important rules is you want one page on your site dedicated to being indexed and supporting a specific keyword or a specific very tightly grouped set of keywords. And there's 2 places where sites fail in this. One is, there's this important keyword category and we don't have any content about it. And that's actually much more rarely the case. What happens a lot more often though, is you start to find where, because there's never been an intentional plan around this, a site will have multiple pages accidentally optimized around the exact same keyword. And what you want to do is almost think about branding your keyword strategy and your content strategy, branding it page by page. So this page is dedicated to being crafted around this set of keywords. So once you have your keywords, the next really important thing to do is to then go through a drafting process and map each keyword to each URL. It's either a page you already have or a page you need to create. And at the end of the day, every single keyword should have a plan. Keywords where there isn't somewhere to map, but you've labeled it as something that's important for your audience, well, voila, you have a content strategy now. You know what pages or sections of your site you need to develop. Or often a lot of our work is taking a site that has a page dedicated to something, but there's actually a lot of search volume and a lot of pieces to that. We can turn a page into more of a content section of pages. So this is just an example of a site I'll get into in a minute. So again, in the keyword to content mapping aspect, it's a kind of a pain in the butt, very kind of manual process sometimes, but it's incredibly important because once you do that, it manages the rest of the decisions you make very effectively. So again, make sure you have one clear page crafted to support a keyword, and then make sure you don't have other pages that are accidentally blurring or optimized for the same thing. Because what you're doing then is creating dissonance for Google. It's trying to figure out, well, which page is the right page for this important term. You can certainly take your keywords, make sure that your content, if you've identified a keyword, is about really tied more to research or discovery. Make sure that the content's talking about that, and usually we actually go and map the estimated consumer stage to the keywords where it's obvious and make sure that the content is in line with that. Here's an example. You want to say like a real world example of what I'm talking about. People are, I'm sure, familiar with LifeLock. So probably the most important term to that business is identity theft protection. It's their brand, right? They're like, we need to be #1 for this. These are all major pages on LifeLock's site. And what are they doing? The title tag is really the strongest indication of the keyword strategy of a page. And it's like, if you're Google and you're trying to figure out, well, one of the first most important rules is for generic terms, your domain is going to get one listing, one page, right? Google isn't going to list lots of results from the same domain on a non-branded generic keyword that's like highly searched. So you need to do a lot of things to indicate to the search engines what is the primary page for this term, and you need to make sure that that page is optimized. And then you need to make sure that you're not accidentally creating confusion of other pages that are optimized for the same or very similar thing. So that's that, avoid keyword blurring. And then the last really important piece that I try to get people thinking about is treat Google, what pages you allow Google to index and rank. start treating that like an opt-in experience. So you get to choose if this page should be indexed and ranking in Google. And if a page doesn't have a marketing purpose, or if a page is too similar to other pages where it's going to create that blurring, then don't be afraid to block those pages from search engines and say, okay, maybe for other reasons we need to have more pages with information about the subject matter, but we don't necessarily have to show that to Google. And without getting into a lot of little technical things, just know there's several different ways that you can block a search engine from indexing or caching a page. Okay, so let's get into the how, the actuality of a project we did. So Firm of the Future, which is kind of an offshoot of what was originally the Intuit's accountants blog, approached us and they said, okay, we have this new website. Our goal, kind of upcoming goal at Intuit is to really, our research has shown that a lot of accountants, CPAs, bookkeepers are very kind of against the idea of moving their clients into the clouds, and they advise against it. And Intuit, for lots of good reasons, wants to get people off of desktop software and into an online environment. So there was this kind of just 3 major goals that we were approached with, which is get accountants, bookkeepers, CPAs to embrace the cloud, get rid of kind of that cloud fear, utilize technology better in how they operate and conduct their business. And most of the site's mission was not to talk about QuickBooks software directly, but it's more, how can we help you be a better practitioner in this space? How can you turn your firm into the firm of the future for accounting? So, and then how do we help people think about changing the mentality of what their business model even is, and stop doing hourly pricing, but start thinking about ways to price to value for their clients. So here's the challenge. You're coming to us with that, and I say, well, I just looked, and guess how many searches a month is someone going, how do I change my accounting firm business model, right? Any guesses? 0, right? So we started thinking about, like, looking at what are the ways that people are searching for this, and the things that Intuit wants to help influence and change the thinking of aren't things that people are looking for, right? So I'm going to go back. So this was kind of my pitch. I told them a story about from about 2003. Okay, so this is a kind of a made-up search result page because I don't have a screenshot from 2003. But I did put the ad on the side if anyone remembers what that was like. Okay, so there's this thing called latent semantic indexing. And in 2003, that was like kind of a big piece of what Google knew it needed to do in developing search technology into the future, was this kind of structured web data. We don't need to get into it. It's a very inside baseball term, okay? And in 2003, nobody had heard of it. More people have heard of it now. But if you were searching latent semantic indexing, Google was pretty smart. They're like, anyone who's searching that, we want to talk to that person, right? So let's put an ad here. And this was truly, there was an ad up there if you searched that said, latent semantic indexing, click here. Maybe you should work for Google. And that's like a really smart strategy pretty early on in the world of search. So the pitch was simple. It's, what are the latent semantic indexing words for firm of the future? What are the words that we know are driven 90 to 99% by people that are this very niche audience that you want to talk to? Okay? So that's how we kind of expressed it. Let's go find all the latent semantic indexing keywords for this group. And it wasn't really necessarily about the content that that Firm of the Future had or was planning to develop, but it was really this idea of how can we bring people in, find out what they are looking for that is a relevant audience, and how can we attract them by having content that might answer the questions or the things that they're looking for, But then once we get them in there, now we have the opportunity to pivot and change the conversation by putting other valuable information and ideas in front of them. So the concept here is just, okay, come on in, we'll tell you what you think you need to know, and now we're gonna tell you what you really need to know, right? So just thinking about that, it's this, an average website often is serving up information people are searching for. They get their information. Okay, I'm happy, I leave. A better website experience is I get some information of what I was looking for, and maybe they give me further information about that subject matter. But now we turn this from a search strategy into a content marketing strategy, and it's how do I get someone in, provide them information they're looking for, and then create a great content experience that pivots the conversation, and how can I tailor that around as I start to discover more information about the type of person who's coming in, I can really tailor that experience. And that's precisely why Mura was chosen for this project, was now we can start to customize the content experience based on what we start to learn about the visitor. So that idea of push versus pull, naturally search is entirely about pull. You cannot convince anyone to search for something. They're just doing it. You have the opportunity to show up, okay? So our strategy was, let's figure out what are people looking for that we know are 90 to 99% your audience. How do we make sure that we have content that supports that and gives them the answer and the information they want? And then how do we build the post-click experience to start educating them on the things we think they really need to know? So how do you develop that insight into what are people looking for, and how do I know these are accounting words? So there's some marketer's intuition. You just try to start to get in the head of what people are looking for. We'll look at any other websites. We'll look at paid search data. We'll look at content that is there. There's keyword research it's its own conversation, but what we set out to do was to find, we looked at about 10,000 or more keywords, and then we started to call that list down and really understand which keywords really we felt like had the highest level of kind of that core audience. And again, we were looking not just for people that were accountants, we were looking for accountants that were somewhere in the middle of or more mature in their accounting experiences. So keywords that were around like getting ready for a CPA test or accounting course, like things like that, no, that's not. We wanted to make sure that our strategy was more about people who were kind of in the middle of doing their careers. So we know CPAs, for example, have continuing education requirements every year. So there wasn't necessarily much content that we had to start with that was about CPE courses. Is that right, Scott? But it was like, well, we know if people are searching for information about CPE, they're the people we want to talk to. So maybe we start thinking about that. We found, for example, that there was a surprisingly large amount of search volume for people looking for information around ethics in accounting. We found dozens of keywords and we realized, wow, that's like a super interesting topic. It's expressly for these types of people. And we found there was no real content yet. So instantly we have a content strategy, and now we're connecting and giving some valuable information. And I think it's just enhancing kind of the brand experience that the site is offering. So we ended with just over 3,800 keywords that made our final list. And now the very painstaking process of mapping every keyword to a page. But this was great because the best thing that Intuit did for us was they contacted us before they did anything. So we were involved in the content management system decision. We were involved in whether we do a subdomain or a separate domain, a subdomain of Intuit or a separate new domain. Every decision from there, we could develop the keyword strategy first and then come in with the architecture of the site and the content strategy. So for this type of an exercise, we look at, well, there's 3 basic pages in a kind of a heavy content type site like this. There's category or subcategory pages that are in the main navigation of the site. And certainly pages that are in the main navigation of the site have the most kind of internal link equity flowing to those pages. Google's going to see those as kind of the biggest, most important pages. So you're going to put most of your head terms, your higher, more difficult to rank terms, in those main category and subcategory pages. On the other side of that, you've got post-level content. So, which there's an appropriate place. If there's kind of a long tail phrase that somebody's looking for, that might be worth writing a post about. But then there's this thing in the middle where we realize that there's 5 articles already existing around LinkedIn marketing, for example. Or I think the example I'm going to go into is QuickBooks tips and tricks. And there was several articles that were giving interesting QuickBooks tips and tricks. So again, if you have dozens of articles about the same topic at a post level, then which one is Google going to choose, right? So this is where creating tag pages was that important middle ground for that. And so the idea of a tag page is it's basically a curated search result page where we found, in this instance, about 40 different articles that were thematically relevant to QuickBooks tips and tricks. And so what we'll do, I know this slide's a little bit light, but at the bottom of each of those articles, there's a crawlable link that Google's going to find, and it's linking over to a tag result page that then lists the 40 articles that are all about this theme. It was too niche of a theme to make it as a category or subcategory because we ended up identifying about 120 of these. But now we have a page. Every time an article is written about that subject, it gets indexed, and Google follows that page and goes to a curated list of search result pages all about that subject matter. And you've got this kind of themed page that ends up being a very healthy way to help the search engines understand and cover things that are not so broad for a category, not so niche for a post. It has some other benefits that if people are interested in from just kind of the way that you want to structure a site. And very quickly, I'll just cover that our goal, especially in heavy content sites, is to keep every post or every page on a site within 3 crawl levels deep of the home page. So what happens when you have a post and then you have a site and over years the post gets paginated deeper and deeper and deeper, and then your old content that's kind of still worth a lot, especially if it's around evergreen topics, just isn't getting found. But if you can do things like this to flatten the architecture of the site so that even a post that's multiple years old is still, through these tag pages, being found a lot more readily, it is more effective than a sitemap. And again, I could go on about all the benefits of that and the reasons for it, but just to touch upon that, that's another piece of it. So at the end, we've got just about every keyword in this set. It's mapped to a page. The pages are created. We optimize the pages around the title tags, the meta descriptions, the header content, the body content, and now we feel like we have a plan for every significant way that audience is searching, and they're coming in, and then it's up to the magic of Mura and the experience platform to do their thing post-click and start to change the conversation and the mindset of that audience. So that's it. I did want to leave, I kind of went through this relatively quickly because I wanted to leave a little time. I never know what people want to know about or are interested. So, just if there's things that people want to ask or dive into, we have a little time for that. Or if everyone's just tired and they're ready. That's a really tough question, right? What do you do when?
Or how do you go about helping teams kind of educate and kind of manage upward?
Yeah. A lot of times it's the way to get management attention in those instances is to start showing, we'll do a lot of activity to quantify the size of the audience and how big it is and how much they're missing out. We take a very quantitative financial approach to that, because if you put missed dollar opportunity in the faces of some of that level of management, that's the number one way to get people's attention. The number two way is you do the same process and you start showing what maybe one of their or two of their competitors are doing, and then the Me Too factor jumps in real quick. But it's funny, you especially sometimes at the top of certain organizations, there is that management theory of SEO is a bunch of hocus pocus voodoo. And so like in certain instances, it's dismissed or it's not recognized how important or valuable it is. So those are money and competitive natures are the two ways I usually play into that. Yeah.
It actually goes off of this here. I know somebody who's just trying to validate marketing automation for their company, was for Intel, and they ended up just doing a test program to look at customer engagement, and they were hoping for 25 to 30%, and then they got 80%. So it was, then it was an easy topic to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So just doing like a test program or something, maybe.
Yeah, and the hardest thing to answer that, because that's always great if you can do a little test and go, okay, now let's scale it. Sometimes the things you have to do to get the initial results, even if it's on a little small test, you have to address fundamental problems that are affecting the entire site. And in the best case scenario, one of the hardest things is trying to educate decision makers sometimes that have a direct marketing mentality about this, that this is not a direct marketing exercise. We have to do a lot of upfront work. You have to invest in that. And in the best case scenario, the response is going to be latent and it's going to be 6 months. Now, this is usually classified as a horizon problem because, well, I spent $20,000 a month for 6 months, and what do I have to show for it? And go, well, if you start looking at, we're creating a perpetuity of marginally cost-free traffic for you, and now go and measure that in 2 years and look at the 24-month lift, and all of a sudden these things turn into often very successful, very profitable marketing exercises for companies. But the hard part for internal people and for outside agents and consultants is helping to develop the right expectations and timeline on that investment. So, go ahead.
How would you explain, or I guess, explain why keyword blurring is not a good idea to someone who has the mindset of just like the more the better?
Sure, absolutely.
How do you navigate that?
So the idea is it is that simple, that you get one page that's going to rank for this term on your site. And what page is it? Because if you start to have multiple pages all talking about the same thing, you see often what happens is Google has one page that it thinks is the relevant page, and then something happens and someone links to another page, and all of a sudden that page gets tripped up as a little more authoritative, and it's bouncing back and forth. And when that happens, the algorithm kind of gets destable, and you'll never ever establish the ranking in the search engines with that page. So it's usually, I think, just a question of helping people understand, having lots of pages, they just have to know you're going to get one page is going to rank for that. So you have to really craft and have a proactive plan about what that is, so that you can influence the right pages showing up for giving the right experience. And that comes back to thinking of maybe what's that someone who's searching that, where are they in the consumer cycle, right? And making sure that if you have multiple pages about identity theft protection, well, people are searching that. Are they ready to buy, or are they researching? And then if you have multiple pages about that, which page is the content that's maybe really like giving the content to people in that right mentality? One of the other things I'll just kind of add to that is you can look at the indexation count, how many pages on a site are indexed. And if you're talking with an e-commerce company and they've got 4,000 SKUs and not much in the way of other types of content pages, then you say, well, how many, if you have a page for each product, how many pages should Google probably see? And the answer is like, well, around 4,000. And then you go, okay, and you do a site colon domain.com, and it shows that there's 67,000 pages indexed by Google. And you go, okay, well, this is actually a less is more scenario. And you're just not giving any control over what you're allowing the search engines to see and not see. And so they tend to have their indexing pages that are very, very similar. And then you're asking Google to go figure out which are the right ones. And you're diluting yourself. And so that's another exercise. Is just our goal is usually not to get more pages indexed. It's to actually get less and be a lot more intentional.
Yeah, mine kind of piggyback on what you were saying. Like, we sell products and we have content pages. And our content pages are more static, and the SEO is really good, and we have really good rankings and results on those pages. But we also sell things, and we can claw our way to the top selling this coffee cup, but in the spring, a brand new coffee cup that's so much better comes out, and there's your 60,000 pages because it's still trying to rank this one, but now we've got a new one that says it's better. And we struggle with that of how do you SEO these products that keep turning over every 6 months, and we sell 10,000 items, but there's 60,000 index pages on the site because it doesn't. And you can't really call that like you could a static page and say, okay, this page about backpacks is better than this page, so I'll really concentrate on this one. When you're dealing with that much data and that much sort of product that's just rolling through the system all the time.
Yeah. So the 2014 coffee cup starts to rank, but now you came out not only with the 2015 and then the 2016. So what do you do? So there's a few questions that come up, and we deal with this. We have a global fashion brand company that, oh my God, that's last year's fashion. Get that out, right? So there's a few strategies that become specific to the scenario. Are you still selling 2015 paper, coffee cups? If you're not, then you can do things like block those pages or do what's called a canonical tag, where you can say, the better version of this page, which is very similar to this other page, is over here now. And you can start giving directives to the search engines that our page about coffee cups is here now. In more, bless you, in more product and like less e-commerce situations, then you start to say, well, let's have an evergreen page that's the same page that's talking about whatever this year's model is. And then you can move the content for the old models into a different page at a different time.
Would you delete the old SEO content?
If you don't need to sell that product anymore, yes. And if you remember that circle, one of the things we talked about is product, because this is where product starts to impact SEO. So when you have products that are retiring, you need to have a takedown strategy. The number one way is if you don't need that page up anymore, you're going to take it down, but you're going to create a 301 redirect, which is just telling the search engines, this page that was here is now moved to over here. And what that redirect will do is tell the search engines not to assign the credit, the authority, the trust of that old page over to the new URL, and it will do a lot to help you translate the rankings over. If there are links, people have linked to that old product page, and that's very valuable for your site. If you just scrap the page, so it's now 404ing, the page doesn't exist, you're losing the link credit. But if you, again, 301 redirect that to the most relevant page, you're also maintaining or harvesting that link credit.
That was the other thing, is you're starting from scratch again with
Yes.
a new item.
Yep, and that's why you have to SEO your business processes. It's exactly that, especially for companies that have a dynamic kind of product line like that.
What's the difference between a canonical and a 301 redirect? What's better? How do you know when to use one over the other?
So a canonical tag is, in the scheme of things, still a newer phenomenon. I think it came out about 5-6 years ago now. It's essentially saying that the definitive version of this page is this. Let me give an example. You're selling fast running shoes, okay? And then you have all this content about this fast running shoe, and then you have that same exact page, but it has a parameter version of green, and another one that's red, and another that's orange. And the only thing that's different about that page is the color of that. But you realize if we start allowing 8 different versions of the same product to be shown, that's going to have that blurring problem. So you still want those pages existing, so when people click on it, they can look at the different colors. A canonical tag will say orange, red, green, all point back to the central main page of the product, okay? If you 301 redirect it, that page, you click on the orange and it takes you right back, it's gone. So the canonical tag is a way to express to the search engines that multiple slight variations of this content exist, but the main one that you should index and trust and assign and consolidate all credit to is the version that all the pages are, the canonical tag is pointing to, if that helps.
So if we recently just came out with a new version of our CMS, and there's new different versions of the documentation that goes along with that, but version 6 was out for so long, is there anything in particular we can do to make sure we can preserve the legacy documentation, but also show off the new documentation? Like that's the new point of truth, but have that available?
Yeah. So the canonical tag would be usually the first method that people would use. The canonical tag is a recommendation. It's not that well respected by the search engines, and they usually take time to absorb it. So it's not ideal, but that's usually the way people do it. The more aggressive thing you can do is you can take the old documentation, put up the new documentation, 301 redirect the old documentation URLs over to the new, and then republish on a different URL the old documentation that doesn't have history or trust, right? So that's a little, if you take the time and it's important, that's a good little hack that can work.
Can you just change the old documentation, just change the title tag and the metadata in it so that it's not being crawled the same way as it was previously?
Sure, or if it's like you need it up for users but you don't need it for search engines,
Exactly. You're trying to force the popularity onto your new document.
yeah, and what you also can do is you can leave the pages up and you can block those pages from being recrawled. You can do that through your robots.txt file and say don't crawl any of these pages or any pages in this folder, that kind of thing. You can also publish in the code template of the page a robots meta tag directive that says no index follow, no index no follow. Generally people accidentally use no index no follow, but the difference is you always generally want to use the no index follow. It means don't index this page, but follow all the links on it, because that can be helpful for your crawlability of your site to discover other pages still. So, and sometimes we'll use both. It just for redundancy, you can block pages with robots.txt and use the meta robots tag. That's like the inside the weed stuff. Yeah. Sean.
Can you talk about best practices for duplicate content? I mean, if you're either have duplicate content on your own site or are, say, creating content from another site and have on your site, where's some best practices?
Sure. Happen to have a slide on that in the appendix. It's a great question because I almost thought of, do I cover this in this? But I figured, well, if people ask, I can do it. So duplicate content, I feel like, is one of the main things that we're combating as SEO consultants. It's two different things that are happening. Either a website has a page of content and they intentionally or usually unintentionally have multiple different URLs that have the exact same content on it. And so, again, you run into this, which page is the right page for Google. It can happen where sites have private label deals in subdomains and they republish the whole site as a private label deal, but it's all the same content. So you have to take consideration of that and pretty much say, I can only allow one version of this site or this page to be indexed. Accidents happen where development sites are put on a subdomain and they're not blocked from search engines. So like the whole site is reproduced and they're kind of accidentally killing themselves. The other thing that happens, especially around like heavy content sites, is they get into content like syndication and content swaps. We certainly dealt with this with Intuit and the firm of the future. So you want lots of extra content because it's valuable and there's an expense to developing it. So you make a content partnership and you get content from another place and you republish it. So now what's happening is it's published on one domain and now it's published on yours. So probably the side that suffers the most is the people that have developed this unique content and all of a sudden it's being republished on another site. The other thing that happens is, let's just say I want to have a news site and I'm not going to write my own, I'm not going to have any original content. I'm just going to republish APWire content. So if Google's seeing all this content on this site, every page of the index is like, oh, this is content that's already been indexed in our database somewhere and it's published somewhere else, and that experience happens over and over and over, does Google think of your site as unique, original, interesting, authoritative, trustworthy? No. So you're starting to potentially damage the trust level of your site. So we worked with a company that had about a 70% of their content was syndicated from AP News, 30% was their own writers, and we said, having that repurposed content on your site is good because people come into your site and now you're offering them more information, and that's fine. It's good for the user experience. But if it's not your content, you need to start getting in a business practice of blocking it. And so the only page, you might have 1,000 articles on your site, but we're only going to let Google index the 300 that are yours, that are unique. And the other side of it was never ever give away your content without structuring in the deal that anyone who republishes your content has to do one of two things. There's a canonical tag that works now cross-domain. So you can say, we're publishing this article, but the original place that this is published is over on this site. And that can help solve the problem. The other thing is you can just say in your content syndication deal that one of the caveats to the deal is that publisher has to block your content with a robots tag or whatever mechanism they choose to use. So I showed an example where this was just for a site we work with, JDRF, it's Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. And we looked at, how many pages of content should you have knowing their business? And the answer certainly wasn't they should have over 66,000 pages indexed, right? So it's like part of that process of helping them figure out what should and shouldn't be indexed. The other example here, though, is I can look at a site colon of the site, and I can grab an exact match kind of phrase out of an important page. So this is a very important page for them. type 1 diabetes facts. This ranks for a lot of big terms, but it's not like the #1 result. And you start to see that they've allowed that same content that's on what I would say is one of the top 3 most important pages of their site. They're allowing that exact same content to be published on there's 19 other or 18 other pages that have, right? And so that's the other kind of duplicate content issue, where you have to think, okay, don't let my important content be republished. The last piece of it is scrapers. People grab your content, they scrape it, they republish it. Google's gotten a lot better at understanding that, but at the end of the day, it can really hurt you. And you can go the legal route and do a cease and desist, and good luck. I mean, it can happen, but a lot of the scraper sites they're, you know, it's somewhere else in the world. It's hard to control. So often I'll tell, I'll urge clients to kind of think about this like an oil change. You have to just kind of refresh your content now and then as you're monitoring it to see if it's starting to get scraped and republished in lots of places. It's a lot cheaper at the end of the day to rewrite some content, especially on those main pages, than it is to go the legal route. Just a kind of a fact of doing business. We good? Okay, cool.